The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. You might know me as the Grey Warder on Twitter and Discord. Welcome to the 5th episode of Podcast of the Dragon. Today I'm going to examine Ravens, Robert Jordan's alternative prologue to the Eye of the World. I'm going to mine it for clues and build a character profile for Egwene, and then I'm going to begin exploring what's going on in her head in the first book of the Wheel of Time. Because let's face it, she goes through some shit, and I bet she's got opinions about it. I'd like for you to imagine a pastoral setting in the Two Rivers some years before our story begins. It's nothing Robert Jordan ever intended to write, and I've actually tried to dialogue how the scene might have played out when his publishers approached him in the late 90s and told him he needed to write it. But I don't think I do a very good job of it, because I didn't know the man, and if I had to guess, I don't personify him very well. He used easily as many pretentious words as I do, but I doubt he said fuck as often. So, just imagine RJ's publishers saying, We want you to write a different prologue for the Eye of the World. We want to try to appeal to younger readers. We really want to get on this Harry Potter bandwagon. Excuse me? Well, the prologue, it doesn't really follow with the same tone as the rest of the story, and so it could lose younger readers. Bitch, I know the prologue doesn't fucking sound the same as the rest of the story. It doesn't sound the same as the rest of the story. It takes place 3,000 years beforehand. Tonally, it shouldn't sound the same. If it sounded the same, it would be a little strange, don't you think? Well, yeah, but we would just like for you to write something a little more kid-friendly, to make it a little more. You want me to make the Wheel of Time appealing to children. You want children to read about horrifying monsters that eat people, and about the crushing psychic toll that endless trauma has on people as it weighs them down. Well, yeah. Okay. And I see Robert Jordan faced with this task, trying to imagine some way to deal with this fuckarow and get some good out of it. Because I'm sure the idea of having to write a child-friendly prologue was not appealing to him. So I think Robert Jordan decided that he would make the best of it. He knew his alternative prologue wasn't going to be good. There was no way to make something good when you have to dumb it down and make what amounts to a giant expository barf pile, throwing everything right out there so that children aren't confused while they're trying to read something that's designed to be a delicate cyclical masterpiece with clues sprinkled throughout so that people pick up more and more each time they reread it. If he had to do this thing, though, he could at least make something decent out of it, and so he chose to use it to give background info about the characters and to flesh them out a little bit more and just kind of give us an interesting little vignette and make it an Easter egg in its own right. RJ particularly uses his alternative prologue, which is called Ravens, to give background about Egwene, who is not a popular character in the Eye of the World. In fact, she's not a character it feels like Robert Jordan really gives the full attention she deserves until probably The Shadow Rising. We start getting point of views from her in The Great Hunt, so by book 2, and he really puts her through her paces in that book. A lot of bad shit happens to her, and he has her deal with her trauma in book 3, but not in depth, and he doesn't really put any effort into showing her working through it or really exploring her trauma, and it almost feels like he's playing lip service to her as a character until he can actually get her where he wants her to be, where he feels like he can really expand on her. And I think where he wanted her to be was away from Nynaeve. I think he felt like Egwene and Nynaeve had to be apart. And once he got her away, he was able to have her begin her massive blossoming. So it feels like he was only truly interested in writing her as of book 4. But lots of stuff happens to her before, and I think he may have felt afterwards, particularly as he developed her character more and more and saw what an amazing powerhouse of a person that she was and how fascinating and incredible she was. I think maybe he felt that he didn't do her justice, and that because you're seeing her in the eye of the world through the eyes of the unreliable narrator, she's not given the benefit of the doubt in her actions. Because there's no inner narrative showing why she's behaving as she is in her interactions with Rand or Perrin. She can come across as bullying or bitchy, and I think Robert Jordan felt she was very much misunderstood, that people really didn't get what he was going for with Egwene. And I think he reasoned that if he had to write this prologue, this alternative prologue, this childish prologue, the least he could do was write it from the point of view of Egwene. So when someone started The Eye of the World, while they might not get another point of view from her through the rest of the book, they would at least have a taste of who she was as a person so that they might better understand her going into it. And in so doing, he made Ravens more than just a steaming shit pile. He made it something that's actually very much worthwhile. He did his best with it, considering it was a pretty thankless thing to have to do, to try to make a series as complicated and intellectual and meta as The Wheel of Time appeal to an audience that was consuming Harry Potter. Hashtag fuck you J.K. Rowling. Hashtag trans women are women. The prologue called Ravens takes place in a meadow east of Emmons Field along the Winespring Water, about halfway between the village and the Waterwood. All of Emmons Field and the surrounding farms have joined together for the spring sheep shearing. Everybody's divided up into different tasks based on age and gender lines. Egwene is 9, and it's her first year actually doing work, and she is a water bearer because the Two Rivers people are eco-friendly and they don't hand out bottles in their shearing swag bags. She's carrying around her bucket, giving people drinks, and thinking ambitious thoughts because she wants to be the best at what she's doing in the hopes that she will move on to bigger and better things. Egwene, we know, is a person who observes and listens, computes info, and puzzles things out. And this whole scene shows that. Shows her wandering around, making observations, forming opinions about things. And one of the most interesting things, like right from the start we get, is learning a lot of Egwene's views about gender in the Two Rivers. So there's a scene where she's filling her bucket, and as she gets out of the river it says, pausing on the bank, she set down her bucket to unfasten her skirts and let them fall to her ankles, and to retie the dark green kerchief that gathered her hair at the nape of her neck. She wished she could cut it at her shoulders, or even shorter like the boys. She would not need to have long hair for years yet, after all. Why did you have to keep doing something just because it had always been done that way? But she knew her mother, and she knew her hair was going to stay long. From an early age, Egwene didn't want to do things the way everyone else does. She is not a fan of Two Rivers conservatism. She's not a fan of things being a certain way because they always were. She doesn't believe in convention for convention's sake, and she is frustrated in the ways of the Two Rivers. In the Two Rivers, women have power. And there is a certain sense of equality between women and men along their gendered lines, but there are gendered roles nonetheless, and the gender roles are very strict. And Egwene's not here for that. She doesn't care about that. She wants to do what she wants as she wants it in a way that is logical and makes sense. She's about freedom and innovation and doing what she feels like doing for whatever reasons that drive her at the time, with no one telling her why it can't be done unless there's an actual reasonable, logical reason. And convention and tradition, those are not reasonable or logical, and so who cares? So she's walking around, she's thinking about clothes. It says, many of the women wore shawls draped loosely over their arms and flowers in their hair for the formality, and so did some of the older girls, though their hair was not in the long braid the women had. A few even wore dresses with embroidery around the neck, as if this really were a feast day. In contrast, most of the men and boys went coatless, and some even had their shirts unlaced. Egwene did not understand why they were allowed to do that. The women's work was no cooler than the men's. So Egwene is not happy about this gender disparity. I totally get that. I resent in summertime seeing men walking around without shirts on, and I think about how breasts have been sexualized to the point where I always have to wear a shirt, and it's bullshit. And Egwene obviously resents these double standards and think they're bullshit too. She doesn't want anyone to tell her how things have to be because she's a woman. Sounds familiar. A little later on it says if she was good enough at carrying water, maybe they would let her help with the food or the wool next year. Girls who are a little bit older either sort wool or they deal with cooking and food. Instead of 2 years later, if she did the best job ever, no one would ever be able to call her a baby again. So she is moving around giving people water, and she is trying to avoid her sisters. And as you see from the previous passage, her ambition comes from being dismissed and infantilized. And it's interesting because if this is a bedrock of who she is, and if that is her fundamental determining personality trait, that she does not like to be dismissed and infantilized, she's the youngest child of 5, she has a difficult relationship with her sisters, which is illustrated throughout this prologue. It seems like the Aes Sedai who chose her out to be the Amyrlin seat kind of fucked themselves from the get-go. They picked an ambitious person who wants to be the best at everything, and seeks out and rises to higher and higher challenges because she doesn't want to be dismissed. She's sick of being dismissed. She's spent her whole life being dismissed, and then they put her in a position of power intending to dismiss her? I don't think so. Her eyes kept moving, searching the crowd. Among all these people, it would be all too easy to walk up on one of her 4 sisters. She always avoided them as much as possible. She has a bunch of issues with her sisters. In the eye of the world, when Egwene is 17 years old, her dad is 61 and her mom is 58. Egwene is an afterthought baby. Marin Alvear was 41 or pushing it when she had Egwene. Egwene's oldest sister, Barrowyn, is 16 years older than she is. Egwene was born the year that she braided her hair. And I got all of the dates and the ages and everything from the Wheel of Time Companion, which is a wonderful book. If you've never read it, I highly recommend getting it. It is filled with a whole bunch of fabulous Easter eggs, and I will be referencing it throughout the podcast and reading bits from it, and I really recommend checking it out. You will find a whole bunch of delightful and interesting things in it, and a lot of stuff that will surprise you, and a lot of things that you might have suspected were the truth will be confirmed for you, and it's really great. Egwene's second oldest sister's name is Aline. She's 12 years older. All of the Alvear girls are really well spaced out, so it seems like birth control is being used. There's at least 3 years between all of the girls, and as much as 5. The middle daughter's name is Elisa, and she is 8 years older than Egwene. Loisa is 5 years older, and Egwene is the last. If Loisa is 5 years older, maybe Egwene is an accident. Like, she's an afterthought child. She wanders around doing her thing. She lives in a small inn with a big family. She's got time on her hands. She'd probably be the kind of nerdy kid who would go around journaling everywhere if the Two Rivers had the paper to spare for journals and just write her observation and thoughts down. But instead she just kind of keeps them in her head, but the cogs are always turning there. I'm not actually going to give you a synopsis of what happens in Ravens. Well, I'll give you a quick, lazy one. Egwene walks around giving water, looking at people, and thinking thoughts, and then it ends with the kids having story time with Tam, where he tells them the story of Luce Theron, and the Age of Legends, and the Dark One being freed, and the Forsaken, and makes sure it's very clear who is good and who is bad, and make sure you understand what actually happened, and sort of undercuts the whole Legends Fade to Myth idea, and makes Rand and Matt and Perrin look 1,000 times stupider when 3 chapters later they appear to have, over the past 8 years, completely forgotten all the clear, concise information Tam laid out in the prologue, and have all their facts mixed up, the way Robert Jordan intended it. That is just as pointless as it sounds, so I'm not going to actually treat the prologue as any kind of story or concern myself with being linear going forth. So anything else that I discuss in the prologue is not necessarily going to be in order. When it comes to Egwene's issues with her sisters, Loisa, the next eldest, is a bit of a tomboy. She thinks Egwene is a pain in the ass, and from the few things we're told, she takes out her anger and irritation on Egwene and definitely picks on her. It says, so she sees Loisa working and says, Egwene took the opportunity to dart away, breathing a sigh of relief when Loisa did not shout after her. Loisa might prefer sorting wool to helping with the cooking, but she would much rather be climbing trees or swimming in the waterwood, even if most girls had abandoned that sort of thing by her age, and she would take her chore out on Egwene given half a chance. Egwene would have liked to go swimming with her, but Loisa plainly considered her company a nuisance, and Egwene was too proud to ask. So her next oldest sister is a dick, and punishes her when she's angry. Egwene's oldest sister, Barrowen, is a widow. The previous year, when Egwene was 8, was the year that she was sick with breakbone fever, which is the first year which is when Nynaeve first channeled, and she healed Egwene. So Egwene lived, but Barrowen's husband and her infant daughter died. So she always avoided all of her sisters as much as possible. Barrowen, the eldest, was the worst. She had been widowed by the breakbone fever last fall, and moved back home in the spring. It was hard not to feel for Barrowen, but she fussed so, wanting to dress Egwene and brush her hair. Sometimes she wept, and told Egwene how lucky she felt that the fever had not taken her baby sister, too. Feeling for Barrowen would have been easier if Egwene could stop thinking that sometimes Barrowen saw her as the infant she had lost along with her husband. So that's uncomfortable and sad. And then, going on a little bit, all of her sisters treated her like a baby, even Aline, when Aline noticed her at all. Most of the time, Aline had her nose in a book, reading and rereading their father's library. He had almost 40 books. Egwene's favorite was the travels of Jane Farstrider. She dreamed of seeing all those strange lands he wrote about, but if she was reading a book and Aline wanted it, she always said it was much too complex for Egwene and just took it. So Aline, who is her second to eldest sister, is a bitch. Egwene's not fond of her middle sister Eliza because she's full of annoying sayings and super irritating, but she comes upon her where she's at a table working with a bunch of other women, and she's trying to be nice to her because her hair isn't braided yet, and she's 19, she's super anxious about it. So, because she doesn't have any sense of tact or common sense, Egwene comes up to her, and in front of a bunch of other people, she says to her, "Elisa, you shouldn't worry so," she said gently. "Maybe Barrowyn and Aline got their hair braided at 16. Most girls did," she thought. She was not all sympathy. Elisa had a habit of offering sayings, "The hour wasted won't be found again," or "A smile makes the work lighter," so like Linny but lame, till your teeth started to ache from them. Egwene knew for a fact that a smile would not make her bucket lighter by one dipperful. But Callie's 20, with her name day coming in a few months now. Her hair's not braided, and you don't see her moping. So her sister doesn't take kindly to that. I sympathize with Egwene in this, in the sense that when I was 8 years old, I can't remember why my aunt was upset about something, but I just remember that I tried to comfort her and give her some kind of advice, and she got mad at me, as you do, because nobody wants to hear advice from stupid kids. And I was butthurt about it, and I talked to my mom, and I was like, I was just trying to give her advice, and my mom was like, most adults don't want advice from an 8-year-old, which I could not understand then. Obviously, I do now. Nobody wants advice from an 8-year-old, but I get where Egwene is coming from. Egwene exists here in the world of the precocious child, where you're smarter and more mature than your peers, so you want to hang out with people who are older because they talk about things that interest you, and they make sense to you in a way that your peers do not, and they have things to offer to you that your peers do not, and most of the time they don't want to talk to you because you're little and they dismiss you, and it's a frustrating place to exist in. And I at least was an only child, so my mom spent a lot of time talking to me and spending time with me that way. I feel like being a youngest child, particularly with such a huge age gap between all the sisters, would be really difficult. And so I'm feeling bad for Egwene here. So she's got the bully sister, the annoying sister, the arrogant sister, the smothery sister. She doesn't have a good relationship with any of her sisters, and all of them are not giving her what she wants, which is just some reasonable conversation. If any of them had been like, "Yo, Egwene, sit down, tell us what you think," just if they would just take her seriously. And I get what that's like. I get what that's like. Nobody likes to be infantilized, but it's hardest in a lot of ways for a kid that's smarter than all of the others and has no one to relate to. All of the Emmonsfield Five are really smart, but Egwene's intelligence is next level. She still does dumb things. Everybody does dumb things, and she's still very young, which puts her, in a place to do dumber things, and her common sense isn't fabulous, but she still has, like, ridiculous smarts, and there's something else, and that is partly inherent, but partly her smarts come from privilege. She grew up wealthy by Emmonsfield standards. She had access to varied materials and experiences. Her father has more books than anyone. She probably had more paper available to her than anyone else to be able to scribble on, even if she can't go around and be journaling all over the place. She has the best observational vantage point in the village. Anything different or unusual, anyone new, will come her way first. There's not a lot of variety in Emmonsfield, but anything that there is, she gets to see. And as well as the general privilege of more money and what it provides in the way of books and materials, with 5 daughters and only 6 rooms and a limited number of guests, Egwene probably had less work growing up and just more time to generally study. The Elvirs always have patrons, even if they don't necessarily always have overnight guests. People are constantly showing up for booze and for meals and just to hang out and be social. Rand actually makes a point of thinking about how Maren Elvira is the best cook around, and I'm not exactly sure how things work there at the end, whether they're like paid in barter, like maybe somebody brings a goose or some flour and Maren will cook and there's enough food for several people to eat. So the person who brought the goose eats, and then someone else comes and brings some tobacco or something, and they get to eat too because there's always extra. But I'm guessing Bran probably more often gives credit, and then people just settle their debts when the merchants come. But regardless of whether they pay coin or whether they barter goods like milk and meat and cheese or tobacco, I'm guessing that probably like John Thane the miller keeps them stocked in flour and then he eats for free. And maybe the Cothans provide dairy products. The Elvirs probably keep their own chickens and their stablemen probably get their firewood. But presumably the village keeps them stocked in food, gets meals out of it, and there's some kind of combination of barter and coin system going on there. But regardless of the fact that the inn stays busy as far as its like restaurant or pub services go, there are plenty of people to split up the work, and that allows Egwene the gift of time. She has time to get smarter, time to read, to observe, to think, and she resents that people who are older and more intellectually compatible ignore her and dismiss her. Rand reads, but he and his dad don't have a lot of books. His father's super smart, but Tam doesn't share his knowledge. All of the stuff that he learned out in the world, he doesn't talk about that because then he has to explain where it comes from. They have a small farm, but there's only the two of them, so they have to work it and they're always busy, so he just does not have the extra time to spend doing the personal contemplation and kind of growth that anyone who works a full-time job understands. Like, we all understand, who are working 40-hour, 50-hour work weeks, what that's like. There's just not enough hours in the day. Matt hardly reads at all. He is literate, but it's not like he uses it much. He gets his smarts from his talks with his dad. He knows horses and how to negotiate. He's never stupid, but his intelligence really ups its game after he goes through the doorway in Roydian, and he gets all the other men's memories and their intelligence along with it, and it really seems to just ups its game. He's all of those other men's memories make him much smarter. Perrin reads. He's contemplative. He has a mind for how things function, sort of an engineer's mind. He's a tinkerer. He's definitely not stupid. Nynaeve has the Two Rivers version of street smarts. She's wary of outsiders. She has a lot of common sense. She doesn't seem to read much or to give much weight to the words of other people unless they've actually earned her respect. So it seems like she turns her nose up at a lot of knowledge that's actually quite worthwhile. But her wariness has also saved her a lot of trouble. I mean, it doesn't save her all of the trouble. She still does a lot of dumbass stuff, but she is no dummy, and she has a good brain, and she knows how to use it. So all of the others are smart, but Egwene sees the bigger picture. And Robert Jordan doesn't often show us the process of her fitting everything together in this meta view that she has of everything, because it packs so much more punch in later books when she's put into this position of power for her to reveal the results of her deviousness rather than how she actually assembles the pieces. Regardless, Egwene's goals of being the best possible of moving on to bigger and better things are nothing more than a desire to grow up as quickly as possible. So in the prologue, Egwene is wandering about, observing and offering water. She sees Perrin. He's with his parents and his sisters and brother, and he's basically sealing his apprenticeship with Master Luwin. With so many Abara cousins out in their big farmhouse, his labor won't be missed, and since the Luwins have no kids, they need an apprentice. I'm guessing that Perrin was probably in the village and got a look at the forge and maybe expressed an interest. He's a good size. It specifically says that he's the tallest boy for his age. And so while he's young to be an apprentice, he's big and he's a very careful kid. And so Luwin was probably like, yeah, for sure, he'll be great. Egwene sees the wisdom Doral Baron with Nynaeve. Nynaeve is working on a conger who was drunk and stabbed himself in the leg with shearing scissors. Nynaeve is 17. She's been working under the wisdom's guidance. Last year, she channeled for the first time when she healed Egwene from the breakbone fever. And it says, the wisdom continued to watch Nynaeve like a hawk. That was surprising. Mistress Baron often praised Nynaeve publicly for being such a quick learner. She had apprenticed Nynaeve 3 years earlier, after her then-apprentice died of some sickness even Mistress Baron could not cure. Nynaeve had been a recent orphan, and a lot of people said the wisdom should have sent her to her relatives in the country after her mother died and taken on someone years older. Egwene's mother did not say so, but Egwene knew she thought it. Nynaeve straightened on her knees, done with fastening the bandage, and gave a satisfied nod. And to Egwene's surprise, Mistress Baron knelt down and undid it again, even lifting the bread poultice to peer at the gash in Billy's thigh before beginning to wrap the cloth back around his leg. She actually looked disappointed. But why? So Doral Baron must have cottoned on to what Nynaeve was doing with her healing, and she's obviously disappointed that it didn't work this time. So, I'm guessing that the audience might make it difficult. Seems like in the description of it, Nynaeve's pretty stressed out, but also, why would Nynaeve be angry about a drunk conger stabbing himself? I don't know that Doral Baron is necessarily, actually understanding my apprentice can channel the one power, and that's what she's doing, is healing people with the power, but she knows something. But this whole paragraph as a whole is an interesting insight into Nynaeve. If someone as mild as Egwene's mother was casting doubt on the idea of Nynaeve as the wisdom's apprentice, and then as the wisdom, I'm not sure exactly when Doral Baron died, but sometime within the 8 years between when this is taking place and when the story begins in the Eye of the World, what must the hard asses on the women's circle have been like? What must Days of Conger have been like? Maybe my beginning to have some more sympathy for Nynaeve can start from there, because that's gotta be difficult. So Egwene is wandering about, looking for Rand. Earlier, when she goes by Perrin, as he and his parents are sealing the deal with the Luwins, she gets accosted by one of Perrin's sisters, who's like, why are you staring at Perrin? Everyone says you'll marry Rand al'Thor one day, and Egwene is like, what do you mean? As she's walking around and she comes upon a bunch of the boys, she says, he could always be found with Matt or Perrin sooner or later. Rand, who everybody said she would marry one day. And a little bit further on, she had heard women say that about her and Rand, but she had not known everybody said it. Egwene is someone who wanders and observes and listens and puzzles, and Rand is a mystery. His visits to the village aren't frequent. He and his dad live in the Westwood. They farm alone. They're an anomaly. And Rand looks different. He looks unlike anyone else in the Two Rivers. Nobody else has red hair. Everyone else has dark eyes. He's interesting. So Egwene following him around when she was little might just have been natural curiosity on her part, and Marin Alvear could have interpreted this natural observational curiosity that is instinctive to Egwene as a crush, or Egwene choosing Rand or something, and so she went and talked to Tam and was like, hey, they seem like they might be a good match, and all of a sudden, bam, everybody thinks that they're promised. And it wasn't that Egwene was actually particularly interested in Rand, it was just that he was interesting. Normally, I would not have been very pleased with Robert Jordan taking the time in this already unfortunate prologue to have Egwene wander around looking for Rand. But it's not that simple. She's not looking at him and thinking he's dreamy or that she's happy to see him. It's like, these people say I'm going to marry him, and it's not that it's exactly news to her, but she's not excited about it. It's almost like she thinks it's weird. It says she expected she would marry one day. Most women in the Two Rivers did, but she was not like one of those scatterbrains she heard going on about how they could hardly wait. She wanted to see those lands that Jane Farstrider had written about. How would a husband feel about that? About his wife going off to see strange lands? Nobody ever left the Two Rivers as far as she knew. I will, she vowed silently. Even if she did marry, would Rand make a good husband? She was not sure what made a good husband. Someone like her father, brave and kind and wise. She thought Rand was kind. He had carved her a whistle once, and a horse, and he had given her an eagle's black-tipped feather when she said it was pretty, though she still suspected he had wanted to keep it for himself, and he watched his father's sheep in pasture, so he had to be brave. Only, she saw him every time he and his father came in from their farm, but she did not really know him. She hardly knew anything about him. If you notice, she's not thinking, would her husband be adventurous and want to come out into the world with her? She's not like, does Rand seem like he's the kind of guy who would want to, go out and see strange lands? She's wondering if her husband would be cool if she left him behind so she could go pursue her own interests. She's not really feeling it. Now I'm going to leave Ravens there because that's about all that's interesting about it. Beyond that, it takes a nosedive into garbage. But we can see from it that marriage is not Egwene's greatest aspiration, and that does not appear to change. From a young age, she has wanted to leave. And while it seems like she and Rand had at least a short period of time where they were really into each other, it was almost like they were ships passing in the night. When he and Tam decide not to go back and look for hoof prints of the Dark Rider, Tam says, I bet you really want to see Egwene, and Rand is like, not really, because he doesn't want any more confusion. It says she's been making him feel increasingly jittery for a year because she's responsible for his feelings, and we never get a description of what that means, but I think that's kind of the point. There's supposed to be just confusion and ambivalence because they're not for each other and neither of them is really into it. Egwene would be a great wife for Rand if she wanted what he wanted, which is to settle down on a farm in the Westwood. But we see that in her acceptance test for the way back for what was, while she feels a certain draw to the notion of a simple life with Rand and a baby, it's almost like it's a hearkening back to a time before all the trauma. She doesn't really have any struggle leaving him. She's kind of, she hears the way back will come but once be steadfast, and she's like, no, I want this too, but it's not even really that she does exactly. It's not a super struggle. She's already walking for the door, and it's not until he starts having crippling migraines from his channeling and he's clutching his head and falling to the floor. That's what really is difficult. She can walk away from him and a baby, and it's not too difficult. She might shed a couple of tears in the rear view. It's leaving him helpless, suffering, in pain, in danger. That's what's hard for her. Leaving a farm in the Westwood and her husband and kid and that kind of a dream life is a lot easier. But even if Egwene were attracted to the idea and really wanting to settle down, there's the problem that Rand is still really immature. He's not ready for marriage. You get this whole thing where he's talking about how he and Tam are going into the village. They've got the cart with the barrels of ale and cider, and they're moving Bella along. He and Tam are walking as fast as they can. They've got their heads down because the good wives go on point when they see Tam. They push Rand onto a stool and they're like, your dad's not getting any younger. Have this pie. My sister cooks even better. You guys really could stand to have a woman out there on the farm helping you out. It's great that your dad loved his wife so much. That means he could love another woman really well. It'd be great. Hey, Rand, how old are you now? Rand is very stubborn and contrary, and every time it happens, it makes him dig his heels in, and I think it just put him a little bit further off marriage, and that's like an unintended consequence. And had that not been happening, there might have been a period of time where Rand could have been excited enough to make an effort and say he was stoked at the idea that they might someday get married, but he didn't. And since they can't read each other's minds, and they're both playing a game of not wanting to give too much away, he put on the brakes because he was cooling on marriage, because others were pushing at him, not even just you need to marry Egwene, but hey, are you old enough to get married yet? Are you old enough to get married yet? And he's thinking to himself, no, I want to be on the farm with my daddy. And Egwene sensed that cooling and was just sort of like, well, all right. We never get a timeline for when Egwene starts training with Nynaeve. I'm assuming that she'd been doing it for a while, but it seems like it's news to Rand, so maybe it was no more than the few weeks from when he and Tam were last off the farm. Regardless, at some point there was a conversation, and maybe it was just her and Nynaeve, maybe it included Meryn, but Egwene is the youngest of 5 daughters. She won't be inheriting the inn, and Rand's behavior is beginning to make her think that she won't be living on a farm in the Westwood either, and she wants to leave anyway, so maybe Nynaeve knew, or she sensed how it lay, or maybe Egwene asked to learn herbs in a more amateur fashion because she loves acquiring knowledge. But at some point the tone of their conversations became, here, Egwene, it's time to teach you a marketable career skill that will make you valuable wherever you go. Nynaeve obviously took her on as a serious apprentice, and at some point Egwene must have pointed out, you're teaching me how to be a wisdom. You'll be wisdom here for years and years yet. There are other villages. Yes, there are. Yes, there are. Tell me more. When we first meet Egwene in the Eye of the World, she and Rand are kind of butting heads because Nynaeve is yelling at the boys for being dumbasses, and Egwene's like, don't let Matt get you caught all up in his bullshit, and Rand, all he can think to say is, you want to dance with me? And she says, I can do it in the afternoon tomorrow, but I'll be busy in the morning. Rand put a hand on her arm. Busy? How? Despite the chill, she pushed back the hood of her cloak and with apparent casualness pulled her hair forward over her shoulder. The last time he had seen her, her hair had hung in dark waves below her shoulders with only a red ribbon keeping it back from her face. Now it was worked into a long braid. He stared at that braid as if it were a viper, then stole a glance at the spring pole, standing alone on the green now, ready for tomorrow. In the morning, unmarried women of marriageable age would dance the pole. He swallowed hard. Somehow it had never occurred to him that she would reach marriageable age at the same time he did. Just because someone is old enough to marry, he muttered, doesn't mean they should. Not right away. Of course not, or ever, for that matter. Rand blinked. Ever? A wisdom almost never marries. Nynaeve has been teaching me, you know. She says I have a talent, that I can learn to listen to the wind. Nynaeve says not all wisdoms can, even if they say they do. Wisdom? He hooted. He failed to notice the dangerous glint in her eye. Nynaeve will be wisdom here for another 50 years at least, probably more. Are you going to spend the rest of your life as her apprentice? There are other villages, she replied heatedly. Nynaeve says the villages north of the Terran always choose a wisdom from away. They think it stops her from having favorites among the village folk. His amusement melted as fast as it had come. Outside the 2 rivers? I'd never see you again. And you wouldn't like that? You haven't given any sign lately that you'd care one way or another. No one ever leaves the 2 rivers, he went on. Maybe somebody from Terran Ferry, but they're all strange anyway, hardly like 2 rivers folk at all. Egwene gave an exasperated sigh. Well, maybe I'm strange too. Maybe I want to see some of the places I hear about in the stories. Have you ever thought of that? Of course I have. I daydream sometimes, but I know the difference between daydreams and what's real. And I do not, she said furiously, and promptly turned her back on him. So Rand dismisses and infantilizes Egwene, which is what upsets her the most. Strange that he doesn't understand, I don't want you to leave because I'll miss you, comes across better than you're too childish to understand the realistic implications of your own agency. The whole time we see her up until Rand goes home, Egwene is upset. She's upset at him. She's upset at Tom Maryland for saying shitty things about Padden Fane because she knows Padden Fane and she doesn't know Tom, and so she defends him because she doesn't know that Fane is a horrible piece of shit. And also because Tom is making fun of them and she picks up on it a whole lot sooner than the boys do, and she's upset about that too. When Tom comes out and he starts to juggle and he's calling off all of the different stories that he can do. Tell us about Len, Egwene called. How he flew to the moon in the belly of an eagle made of fire. Tell about his daughter Salia walking among the stars. Rand looked at her out of the corner of his eye, but she seemed intent on the Gleeman. She had never liked stories about adventures and long journeys. Her favorites were always the funny ones, or stories about women outwitting people who were supposed to be smarter than everyone else. He was sure she had asked for tales about Len and Salia to put a burr under his shirt. Surely she could see the world outside was no place for 2 Rivers folk. Listening to tales of adventures, even dreaming about them, was one thing. Having them take place around you would be something else again. So Rand, being an arrogant shit, assumes that her choices revolve around him, rather than that she's grown to want something different, that she's started to make plans, and she's just mentally older. And at this point, despite being 2 years younger than he is, she is mentally older than him. Egwene lives in the center of town, and she sees everything first. She's curious, and she tries to figure it all out and know everything, so she is always paying attention. When Moraine and Lon arrived the evening before Winter Night, Egwene likely saw them come in. She probably served them at table and put stuff in their rooms. She probably brought them water and firewood. They're so unlike any other people the villagers had ever seen. She would have volunteered to do any task that brought her in proximity and allowed her a chance to study them, to eavesdrop, to just even talk to them. When Ewan Fingar tells Rand and Matt about the strangers and tells them about Moraine, he mentions how she pisses Nynaeve off by condescending to her before she realizes that she's the wisdom. And it says, the Lady Moraine didn't know she was the wisdom. She apologized when she found out. She did, and asked some questions about herbs and about who's who around Emmons Field, just as respectfully as any woman in the village, more so than some. She's always asking questions about how old people are and how long they've lived where they live, and I don't know what all. I wonder if the tons and tons of questions Moraine asked of others were just dressing to make her actions appear consistent and unremarkable. I wonder if she got all the info she needed about the boys from Egwene that first night just by asking her questions. Questions like, are there a lot of young people your age around here? The spring pole, will you dance it? How many marriageable young men are there? Do you have a boyfriend? Oh, really? How nice. How old is he? Did he just turn 19? Oh, back in December? Because, for our reference point, Rand's birthday's back in December. Are there a lot of December babies? Oh, his two besties are within days of him. How odd. I think Moiraine would have had no trouble getting endless information from Egwene, who would have been fascinated by her, found her inspiring. She is a grown woman with her hair unbraided, scholarly and poised, with knowledge about the world. Egwene would have been totally there for that. Even before Egwene knows Moiraine is Aes Sedai, she knows she's a woman who moves through the world differently than Two Rivers women do. Moiraine shows her a woman that doesn't put up with any bullshit or let anyone tell her what to do. She's proof that women can be anything, that gender roles don't have to be defined. She's proof that there are different relationships between men and women. Lan and Moiraine aren't married, they're friends. They're companions and co-workers. They are a unique team. They're something that's never been seen before. Moiraine and Lan come into the Two Rivers, and Egwene sees them, and it's like, here is proof that nothing has to be a certain way. We know from Rand's POV, as he's dragging his father into the village on the litter, that everything with the Trollocs on Winter Night that gave Egwene the 1,000-yard stare. You know, when she's running around with bandages and she stops and she sees Rand, she's got the shadowed look in her eyes, but she is adaptable and really good at coping. Nynaeve probably eventually set her off to get rest, and presumably she went home, and I'm guessing she's still just kind of observing and thinking. She's probably really full of adrenaline and amped up, just going over the whole experience. And she has to be thinking about Moiraine and what she saw her do. She'd be interacting with the other villagers who were all like rebuilding and getting everything together. And at some point with talking to them, she would have learned that Lan had bought a horse and would have been asking herself why. And then she sees Perrin trying to hide his axe under his cloak, kind of trying to walk around it, Matt being all skulky, and the connections just kind of rapid fire together in her brain, ding, 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 and she's thinking, here is an opportunistic time to get the fuck out of this place while there is safety in numbers, and she is not about to let Moiraine get away before she can ask her, how can I learn how to make lightning? She thinks the boys are just taking a chance to leave, and she does not buy that the Trollocs are after them when they're all like, you can't come with us, the Trollocs are chasing us. And frankly, why would she? She's used to them being dramatic and full of shit, and there's nothing about them that is special or interesting, so I don't think it's strange that she dismisses Rand's insistence that they have to leave because the Trollocs are after them. I can see her wanting more time with Moiraine. Like, I bet she was just dying in the aftermath to be like, I want to sit down with this woman and ask her a million questions, but there was no right time. And all it would have taken was knowing that Matt and Perrin were obviously going to leave with the Aes Sedai, and she was like, I am on that train. It's really unlikely Egwene would have put herself forward to do it on her own. She doesn't know Lan and Moraine's business, and she just does not have what I would call a Fail level of presumption. She's not just going to hop on a boat and be like, oh, I'm part of your party now. But knowing that friends were with her made it an easy choice for Egwene, and she is not about to hesitate. And she isn't going to be told no. Egwene is adamant that she won't be left behind. She didn't need a reason to leave. She just needed an opportunity. And if it came to her fraught with danger, so be it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. If you have a sneaking suspicion this might be the first of 2 episodes about Egwene in the Eye of the World, you'd be right. You can find me on Twitter at WarderGray, that's Gray with an E. Check out Watt Trivia and Games. You can find the link to the Discord on Twitter at TriviaWatt. You can come on in, join some of the teams, play in a whole bunch of games. There's a great community there. There's a content hub where you can find a whole bunch of different Wheel of Time content creators. It's a great time. We've got a great community, and you'd really like it. Podcast of the Dragon has its own channel on that Discord, so if you want to talk to me, give me some comments or some feedback about the podcast, you can go ahead and talk to me on that Discord. If you want to just send me an email, you can do so at podcastofthedragon@gmail.com. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. I'm the Grey Warder, and if I had to choose between marrying a red-headed farm boy and learning how to cast lightning bolt, you better believe Ginger's gonna get lonely.